It is Friday, October 11th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another sparking, silent Fantasio episode of LTPS. A lot of good games coming out lately, so there's no shortage of things to play. But before we talk about that and our news stories, I should mention I will be at Retro Game Con in Syracuse today, tomorrow, and Sunday. So the whole weekend I'll be doing some panels. Me and Terrell will be walking around, buying some games. We'll probably also spend a lot of time in the TCG section, since we'll be bringing some decks and playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And things like that. So if you see us, by all means, you can stop. We can chit-chat. I always love talking to anybody that, God forbid, actually watches this channel. You just have to actually indulge me in conversation by telling me what games you're going to buy or pick up and things like that. Always love talking to people. So with that in mind, let's begin, as always, with our very brief reminder for the PS Plus Essential lineup. The October games are live on PSN, so make sure you claim those before they go away. Got plenty of time left on that. And then we also have the PS Plus Extra and Premium lineup now announced, going live on the 15th for October. And PS Plus Extra, not looking too bad. We have some good titles in there, that being Gris, with Neva coming out very soon. I thought Neva was maybe going to be a day one launch title into Plus, but that was not the case. But you do have that on there. Return to Monkey Island, I really enjoy. Dark Pictures Anthology, of course, so another spooky title to play there. Got Ghost Recon Wildlands. Nothing insane, but I would say it's, decent. There's probably a good varied selection there. Going into PS Plus Premium, though, we have the Last Clockwinder PS VR2, very good VR2 game, and then Dino Crisis did in fact show up pretty much right away, since they said that would show up later in the year, but that was really just this month. And then also Siren, so we've been talking about how that was relisted on the store, got those new rewind, save states, video presets, and R-Type Dimensions EX PS4, that's basically one of those PS3 games that got a remaster, so that's under the premium section on PS Plus. But yeah, not too bad, nothing insane, but I will say having Siren back on there, and then also Dark Pictures, and then Dead Space for a monthly lineup game. It's always cool when they do lean a little bit into October and offer a bunch of horror or spooky games. If anything, I think they should do a lot more titles, but yeah, it's not terrible. Anyway, going into our first news story, a lot of you probably have noticed this, but if you're in Europe, then you might already have the new PS5 Welcome Hub on the console, because as Sony said before, that was going to be about a 1 to 2 month rollout, basically. So here in North America, a lot of people are getting it within like a week or so, and a month later, it's now finally showing up in Europe. So I'm not entirely sure if that's like a particular country by country, like county by county thing. From what I'm seeing, it sounds like a lot of people already have it. So it's server side. You don't have to update your console, so if you don't have it just yet, don't worry. At a certain point, you'll just log into PS5 and it should just appear because the console is ready to start displaying it. So it's server side, should show up fairly soon. Next up, this one's more of a little PSA here, but if you remember from about 1 or 2 months ago, we had those PS5 refurbished consoles show up on PS Direct. You just could not order them at the time. Well, now you can, so you can officially buy a refurbished PS5 directly from Sony on PS Direct if you live somewhere with PS Direct, and get a 1-year warranty with these refurbished consoles, which that's the real benefit, and also the low price tag as well, because it actually is very good in that it's $350 USD for a digital console, or $400 for a disk drive model. Now there is a pro and con here, being that these are CFI 1000 series consoles, so the digital edition cannot accept a disk drive, so you gotta live with digital and make that choice right then and there. Or the disc console, the pro there being that console is truly offline, unlike the modern slim consoles with the detachable drive that normally have a one-time online handshake. So if you care about the long-term preservation of the machine, then there's the benefit there. Also, the CFI 1000 series consoles, generally, depending on the revision that you get, has a very high cooling overhead, because we saw over time with those separate variations that they were removing copper from the heatsink and things like that, so which wasn't necessarily bad for the following models, but the very earliest one, it was clear that they had a lot of overhead to remove and price down the console over time, or rather the components over time, to try and keep it competitive with the bill of materials, because obviously the console has not gotten cheaper when it comes to new. But either way, I still find it's a very very good option for those looking to buy a PS5 or maybe get a second one. I'm also very curious as to what their standard is for what they do mention is that the consoles will have some cosmetic defects. So considering a lot of those models, I mean all of them at this point, still have that glossy center portion where it's a glossy like black plastic, and that's very sensitive to scuffing. Depending on the model you get, I'm sure around the USBs, like it's going to look all jacked up and things. So I'm curious if they like attempt to resurface that, or do they replace them? I mean, I want to know what their standard is when people start getting these consoles in. So I will be watching this very closely to see what their own refurbishment program looks like and what their standards are going to be. In other hardware news, let's move on to PlayStation 5 Pro, where it seems like Digital Foundry was able to get some hands-on time with the console in a manner where they're actually allowed to capture and source their own footage. So they did this for The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered on PlayStation 5 Pro. That's the one game they were able to look at a little bit more deeply this time around. So we have some details for the Pro setting of this game. So again, I will link the full video down below, but for a brief summary here, the game does render at 1440p, then outputs at 4K with PSSR, targeting 60 frames per second, and some of the side-by-sides are pretty clear where it looks much cleaner compared to the base console's performance mode. The foliage seems to be getting a really big improvement here, where the finer detail of leaves and grass is much more apparent. Now comparing the Pro mode to the base fidelity mode, which that's 4K with TAA applied, the Pro mode is still able to produce what seems to be a much more, cleaner image quality with a lot of refined detail, and this is again with an internal resolution rendering at 1440p, but PSSR is coming in, cleaning the game up to this point where we're seeing it still matching the fidelity mode on the base console. Now PSSR is still producing some slight artifacts and very specific circumstances, but if you want to see more, you can obviously check out the entire video. But this is also the kind of game where it's a PS4 title. Very ironic that the entire way through, this is a game that was on base PlayStation 4 consoles, has a Pro setting, 5, now a 5 Pro setting, so it is one of those games where it's not necessarily going to be the greatest showpiece per se, and if anything, it really does sort of, in a way, highlight the very fine differences between what would be technically 4 consoles, PS4, PS4 Pro, 5, now 5 Pro. It's a testament to how good the game can look on lower-end hardware, but at the same time, still also I think is a very good representation of what Pro can do for somebody that, again, caveat being if you're like super into getting the very best out of your games, then clearly the Pro is going to deliver that on all fronts. You would certainly hope so for that price tag, but really I guess, bigger news here in a way is that we do finally have a Pro Enhancement label showing up for Ragnarök. So on the PlayStation Store, the game is now titled with a PS5 Pro Enhancement, which is maybe a little strange in that I'm surprised the game was not ready to be shown off for the press initially during the actual presentation, and then some of the following hands-on times that the press has had as well. But it does seem like the game is going to have a Pro Enhancement, which is great because I still have not platinumed that game yet, so it'll be good to go back and play on the Pro. I'm still hoping for Returnal. I would love to see Returnal get a Pro Enhancement, not even so much for the image quality, because the game does have a pretty low internal res at I think it is 1080p, but really, I think the game would be great on console with like an uncapped high frame rate mode, so it would be excellent to see the Pro offer that if Housemarque is able to, get in there and offer a Pro Enhancement. As for the running list of PS5 Pro Enhanced games, it's now up to, at the time of filming, 67, so it really is growing well before the console is even officially available. So it does seem like by the time this year's over, we could easily have 100, 150 Pro Enhanced games, perhaps more than what PS4 Pro had by the end of its, by the time Sony was done manufacturing the console, that was a lot sooner than base PS4 consoles, which I believe, as far as I know, they're still manufacturing base PS4s, which is kind of nuts. But we are seeing 3 PSVR 2 games in that list as well, which that so far has been, far and few between with PSVR 2 games, because PSVR 2 there's a lot of upside for PSVR 2 in that there's a lot of titles that, lean on reprojection, so it would be great to see some of those games also get proper support on PS5 Pro, because I'm not entirely sure just how much enhancement those games can reasonably see retroactively through the boost mode, because just the way some of those games are hard-coded and capped, they might not necessarily see a huge improvement. It'll always vary on the game, but I think PSVR 2 also has a lot of upside on the Pro as well, so we'll be still watching this closely to see what games get Pro enhancements. Let's move on to some video game sales data. We have some news coming out of the UK where the GSD, which tracks video game sales data in the UK, has outlined some sales figures for Astrobot. Not even so much like direct numbers, but we have a ranking on how well the game actually did, so we've been following this very closely. And Astrobot, across physical and digital, the game is tracking about 24% higher than Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart in the first 4 weeks. It came in at number 5 for the top 10 games in September, and as a reminder, we have those new challenge levels coming out very soon as well. But very happy to see Astrobot doing as well as it's doing, because I had no expectation that the game was going to be number 1 across the board or anything. Again, this game doesn't necessarily have to do 5, 10 plus million lifetime, although I think over time it could certainly start getting into that upper echelon of like 5 million plus if the reputation sticks for this game, and it might do very well over the holiday season. But it's just really encouraging to see this game do well to what was comparable here being Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which came out a year into PS5, an established IP, but also the average cost for the game was higher than what Astrobot has nowadays. So Astrobot does have some things going for it, but in terms of wide appeal, it's a very good comparable. Now, the other metric that we did get out of the UK is also the digital edition consoles, which I thought this was very noteworthy as well. September 2024 was the second best month ever for the PS5 digital edition console. The previous best month was December 2023. And conversely, the PS5 disc drive attachment appeared on the best-selling accessories list for the first time, ranking number 21 by units and 8% by revenue, which that could be a very big indicator of some people probably buying the drive for their existing digital PS5s, but in all likelihood, also folks probably buying the drive to get ready for PS5 Pro. I found this noteworthy in, I guess, both directions, right? And that we have, some data showing that the split for digital consoles is getting bigger and bigger. At launch, as far as I know, on a global scale, it was an 80-20 split, as in primarily Sony was still selling disc consoles. But recently there's been more figures that split is evening out a little bit to where it's like 60-40, so about 40% are digital consoles, and this is just another indicator. But at the same time, we've now got this separate disk drive that's selling more as well, because enthusiasts want to have that disk drive with their consoles. So it's like kind of a good and bad thing, depends on how you frame it. I mean, it's always important to understand that as much as I love physical media, and I know a lot of you do as well, still something where people just in droves over the past 10 years historically are now transitioning over to digital on a more frequent basis. So that is the reality we are now in, but it's just fascinating to see this play out where, over 4 years now at this point, we have seen the ratio start to still favor the disk drive consoles as far as I'm aware, but it is getting a little bit more even nowadays. Next up, let's cover up some rumors that I think are not really all that credible, but I do want to at least acknowledge it in case you saw this and use it as more of a jumping off point in terms of what we should actually be expecting for that story. So the first one is this dubious source mentioning that we should be getting some kind of God of War Saga repackaged remaster thing for the upcoming 20th anniversary for God of War. So sometime next year, the actual rumor is that we'll get God of War 1, 2, 3, and Ascension, which would be new for a modern port on PS4, PS5, and also the PSP games repackaged again for the 20th anniversary. Now, the source is dubious, that's one problem. I won't even bother mentioning them, but the other problem here is simply that the way I picture this is that, well, one, we already have 3 remastered on PS4, and that's fine enough for now, even though Sony obviously has a history of going back and remastering what appears to be recent games, but that's neither here nor there in this case. It's just a matter of, like, for 1, 2, the PSP entries, these probably can just show up on PS Plus Premium through Implicit Conversion's Syrup emulation engine. I mean, you have to figure that's probably what is actually going to happen. Now, Ascension, I mean, is the problem here, right? That is a game that's stuck on PlayStation 3. I believe it is still on streaming for PS Plus Premium, previously PS Now. Not sure if that's still on there. But, I mean, the thing is, I think that's probably the most natural path, and Ascension might just be stuck for a little while. Maybe that one particular game could be ported. Now, I also want to be like wrong about all this. I would love if that's exactly what we're getting, but it just doesn't really track with what Sony's doing lately, which, I mean, in terms of like these repackaged multiple game collections, we haven't really had that in a long time. Sony sort of, stepped away from that product design. So I wouldn't expect it to happen. I think a lot of the PS2 and PSP stuff is on the standard roadmap for what we've seen thus far through PlayStation Plus Premium and what implicit conversions does for these games. Now, this other rumor is, again, very questionable, but the source here, which we should mention, is the one Russian journalist, Anton Logvinov, where we actually did talk about them before from that one discussion topic where they were the only source initially from like 2-3 months ago for that like portable PlayStation that would play PS4 games. And at the same time, like I mentioned, like, oh, okay, so the source might not be very good, which that's what I've heard about this particular person, but it was more a conversation of if they ever do local play again, as I've said like 1,000 times, it would have to be, local play for existing platforms, that being PS4 and 5. That's the only way where it's really financially advantageous and it really works in today's environment. So we had that conversation. Now they're back with a new rumor on Telegram about PlayStation 6, where allegedly Sony brought a very early PS6 prototype to TGS, and they showed it off to a select portion of the press and some developers, and apparently that's why everybody came out to TGS this year, and it turned out great, just like the old days. And the problem with this rumor is that it probably was not a very early prototype, and it certainly wasn't at a trade show, and it wasn't with the press, and so every aspect of this just is not believable at all. But I still found this was a very good jumping off point for the story in that, as I mentioned before, like we're 4 years into PS5. This would be around the time where, yes, early PlayStation 6 rumors are going to start, but we do have to tread carefully on which ones are worth humoring and which ones are nonsense. In this case, this one reads like nonsense, but what does seem a lot more likely right now is that Sony probably is doing what they did with PS4 and 5, which is this new company philosophy when Mark Cerny took on the hardware program with PlayStation 4, and that they want to open a dialogue with their development partners, not just first party, but all big third-party studios, even some smaller indie devs, partners they can trust, and a lot of the stuff goes through lawyers and things like that, and it happens during site visits. And so a lot of what I know and what's on record for how both these platforms were made, if it's anything like those two, it's going to be similar in that it's a very tight ship and a very tight process that's upheld by only a handful of people, but that is where Sony will begin the very early consultation process for PlayStation 6. I would safely guess that's probably what's going on right now, but taking it to a trade show, showing it to the press, an early prototype, none of that seems even remotely feasible or possible or just likely in the here and now. But are they having that dialogue with developers like they did with PS4 and 5? I would say, yeah, that probably is happening. If it hasn't happened yet, it's probably happening very soon. But that was still a very good design philosophy for those consoles, so it does bode well going into PlayStation 6. I want to at least say that in relation to this rumor, which I still find is not very accurate. Next up, we have some very disappointing news for the Little Big Planet franchise, and that LBP3 is officially being delisted from the PlayStation Store and all DLC as well on October 31st. So this was confirmed by the official Twitter account, just clarifying that, hey, if you want to buy these games before they're gone, then now's your chance, and also letting people know that you're still entitled to re-download the game and all the content after the actual delisting takes place. And that's normally how this works for any content that's tied to your ID. Very rarely are you going to actually lose ownership of the content, so you're allowed to buy it, have it tied to your ID, but it will be delisted on October 31st, which no doubt sucks. I will say people are immediately connecting this to what happened with the games near the end, where LBP 1, 2, 3 on PS3 and 4 Vita, they were all taken down prematurely because of a bad actor in the community where they were, DDoSing the game and altering in-game messages and posting really insidious stuff on there, and just obviously the games had to be taken down, but then they stayed down, which was really frustrating that these games could not properly sunset, because 4 or 3 on PlayStation 4 did go back up for a little bit, then taken down again, and then shut down prematurely. So for a game with play, create, share as the foundation, all these community levels, don't get me wrong, I'm still very upset with how that all played out, especially by allegedly somebody that was in the community, and this is how you want to treat the games that you like? Come on, ridiculous. So I'm still very upset with all of that. But with that in mind, that doesn't really have, I think, anything to do with this, people are, I think, very quick to forget that LBP 1 and 2 are also delisted after 10 years. I mean, I forgot that with LBP 3, it is coming up on 10 years, and that's why it's being taken off PlayStation Plus. So LBP 1 was delisted in 2019, LBP 2 in January 2021, like right after 10 years, because these games do use licensed music and a lot of the DLC costumes and things like that. So this is the 10-year cycle, and that's why the game is probably being taken down. So it's not really in direct connection to the unplayability of the online portion of the game. I think they probably would keep it up. If anything, I'm more surprised. I mean, in light of all the recent news, why would you not at least add a little line in the official image on Twitter like, hey, because of licensing, that's why this stuff is going down. A lot of those costumes too, they've got Marvel characters on there and things like that. But maybe they just want to avoid this whole like, because the other aspect of it too is why take down everything when some costumes can still stay up, like the PlayStation IP. There's a lot of like levels and costumes that in theory don't have to be taken offline from a 10-year license. But maybe it's just more of a blanket on-off switch. They don't want any confusion with like a weird cluster of content on the store, but the base game's not there, and then the other costumes aren't there. So maybe that's just the line of thinking. I don't know. I don't really agree with it, obviously. I think anything you can save and keep on the store, it should be on there. But that is probably what's going on. So it's, I mean, I don't like it, but I mean, 10 years, licensed music, and it's being taken offline. That, and also like LBP 1 and 2 were like, that's the PlayStation 3 store. If anything, it's a little weird that Vita is not down just yet. I believe that also is still listed, and that came out in 2012, so not sure if like, I can't remember if the game has like a lot of licensed music in there or whatever the case is. But I will add this, which is, I can't really get on board with this whole, like, I don't know, is this always like the low-hanging fruit thing nowadays with internet meme culture and everything, where it's like, oh, you know, Sony's killing Sackboy and he's being replaced by Astrobot. Like, son, we just had a new Sackboy game 4 years ago, and yeah, that does actually still seem very fresh in my mind. It was day one on PlayStation 5, a very fresh new idea for what Sackboy could be on PlayStation 5. I mean, it's not like it's been 10, 20 years since we had a new Sackboy game. Like, let's relax. We just had a new Sackboy game. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know if we're getting a new one anytime soon, but I don't know, like, it's... that joke did not land with me. I'm like, okay, one, I love Astrobot, I love Sackboy 2. We just had a new Sackboy game, a very new creative 3D, you know, land-inspired one. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just not hip with it nowadays, but I think Sackboy is still fairly relevant, and I do sincerely hope we'll see more Sackboy. Maybe not a proper LBP4, but the other thing I guess I should mention, not to drag out this story, is that it's always the, you know, deeper communities for these games that save them, right? Going into like PS3 Online every year. It's always those communities that properly archive and get these games back up. Last time I checked in with that Internet Archive for all those levels, like they're finally restored in a way, like they're playable. I think it's still kind of a weird thing where you have to like jump through some hoops. You have to get like the hash for like the exact level you want to play, and that's how you can like lucky dip into that one particular level. So it's kind of a weird jumping through hoops compromise in the here and now, but there's a lot of ongoing developments with LBP and like the whole beacon thing, and there's a lot going on. I haven't really kept up with it too much, but it is always proper archiving efforts, reverse engineering, and the hardcore dedicated community that can properly keep the game going. You can never depend on Sony or any other platform holder or publisher studio to keep doing those things for you. So LBP does live on, and it's the community that's keeping it going. Let's talk about the Ballistic Moon Until Dawn remake on PS5 and PC, where so far it seems like the game is really not doing well based on performance and also sales performance. So I've not had the chance to dive into the game myself just yet. Not really in a rush to, considering I platinumed the 2015 game. I still like Until Dawn, and I think there's a lot of upside to playing the game, or the new remake, but I'm just not in a rush to play it. From what I'm hearing, a lot of performance hiccups, the game locks up, rough frame rate, so that's disappointing to see. And then, yeah, sales, we've got some early indicators that the game is just, like, hardly anybody's really buying or playing the game, which, honestly, I'm not sure the company is maybe that concerned with that just yet. If only because we do have the movie coming out very soon. That's another separate news story here, is that filming has now wrapped on the Until Dawn movie, and that's still supposed to come out October 2025. This is where the PS Studios boss at the time, Herman Hulse, now the CEO of the Studios Business Group, but him and Assad Kizilbash had been very direct about this, in that while it's great to line up games with PS productions, you can't line them up perfectly. So even though I think the game probably could have benefited from a delay, it seems like they just don't really care if the games are ready. And historically, they've always been this way, which is if the game's ready, they send it out there. Now, this game, again, not ready per se, but they do still tend to ship games whenever they are able to ship them, and the game can still easily see that huge sales boost by the time the movie does come out. So I'm not even sure they're really that concerned with low sales right now, because they just want the game out there, and then the game is available once the movie does show up, and that's where that'll really catapult sales of the game, I expect. And hopefully by then we see some patches to clean up this game, even though Ballistic Moon is kind of in a weird spot where they laid off a few staff members, because it was only I think 12 members, but also in the grand scheme of things, they weren't a massive studio, so they're just trying to weather the storm in between big contracts. But for the Until Dawn movie, we can say this, which is we had the director, David F. Sandberg. He commented on a Reddit post about the movie saying, giving us some insight into how they're approaching it, where he says, and I quote here, "I frankly wouldn't have been interested in directing it if it was just a condensed, recast, non-interactive version of the game. It would be impossible to not be seen as something lesser. Instead, it's more like an expansion or a continuation of the world. If you're into what the game was, you'll probably be into what the movie is." So that's a very pragmatic way of looking at it. I will admit I was probably more on the spectrum of being totally fine if it was a full recast and non-interactive version of what the game was. The only problem there would be, I guess, a lot of contention with fans on the choices that the movie goes with for character deaths and how the endings play out, when the game is very much not like that whatsoever. The whole fun of Until Dawn is seeing what plays out for you, and then also hopping online and watching Let's Players or streamers and see what they do, or maybe playing with a friend or a significant other, and kind of being in that awkward angle of oh, what do I do? What do I press? Right, that's the spirit of Until Dawn, and by proxy, all the Dark Anthology games. So I mean, I get where he's coming from, so it would maybe make a bit more sense as to why they'd want to just expand foundationally what the game is about, and I'm very curious to see what they do end up going with when the movie is all wrapped up and they release this thing next year. Moving on to the Silent Hill 2 remake, going back to last week's episode where I filmed these before the embargo, I did not know the reviews were going to be that good, so that's the news, is that wow, this game actually turned out amazing. It seems like people are really enjoying it. I cannot wait to really sit down and check it out myself. But what I guess is more noteworthy is how Bloober was able to go against all odds here and really deliver on, capturing the essence of Silent Hill 2 and also restoring it in a manner that is a lot more playable to a modern audience. That, and also, I guess it's a matter of because this was the trepidation going into this the entire time, right? Is that looking at Bloober's track record with Layers of Fear or The Medium, how they're very slippery with certain story elements or even gameplay mechanics. And I think I remember saying at the time, that's obviously a problem, and there's a lot of nervousness going into this remake. But if you give them something that's a bit of a an outline here, a foundation, here's the game, and you just tweak it from there, it's okay, well, maybe we can be a little bit optimistic that they can nail it, and it seems like they were able to do it quite well. I also thought it was very funny, if you did not see this, but they also acknowledged the Comic Sans font sign from the PS3 and 360 remaster, which was such a ridiculous thing at the time because that remaster is a very poor way to play those games. So they actually hid the Comic Sans sign inside the Silent Hill Ranch if you're able to clip inside of it. So that went viral this past week, which was just so funny to see that. I love that Bloober can also be a little bit funny and put in a good Easter egg that openly acknowledges the history of the game. So it's really encouraging to see. And now I'm seeing a lot of folks say okay, Bloober, maybe you can take on the rest of this franchise, maybe a new entry. And I think that's reasonable. I think they should do it. Moving on to a very big Xbox news story that has a very clear implication for PlayStation hardware, and that is the recent announcement out of the Halo World Championships, where Microsoft has confirmed that 343 Industries, the developer of Halo, is being renamed to Halo Studios, and also the team is moving over all future entries to Unreal Engine 5. Which this was rumored earlier in the year, and this also goes back to a rumor about a possible PS5 release where a remake for Halo Combat Evolved was being considered for PS5, and so moving over to an established engine like UE5 will put the franchise in more of a position that will better facilitate multi-platform development, because this is a studio where historically they've not shipped on PlayStation, so getting their existing engine and tools, on PlayStation 5, not impossible, but rather this would better facilitate that with UE5 as well. I mean, it is more of an Xbox story in that we have to consider where 343, now Halo Studios, is with their own pipeline, because there is a timeline here that's a little blurry on exactly when they moved over to UE5, which was apparently a few years ago, and this relates to some of the layoffs and the studio hierarchy and them working on Halo Infinite 2 or something, and then that was canceled, and so it's now a question of how far away are they from a big mainline entry in Halo. You have to figure there is going to be some sort of stopgap games in there, and a remake of Halo Combat Evolved would certainly make a lot of sense, and we have had that rumor of Microsoft considering Combat Evolved on PlayStation, which goes back to the ongoing new multi-platform strategy that the company now has. So it may be a very weird timeline, but I think we are in it where we could potentially see Halo, an Xbox staple, the most Xbox IP out there, actually ship on PlayStation. It would be a very bizarre thing. I mean, it's always been a really weird marketplace nowadays in that we've got, Xbox games on PlayStation, given they're in a very weird spot compared to, say, Sony and Nintendo. But still, you've got, SIE games on Xbox, Xbox now shipping on PlayStation, SIE shipping some games on Switch now willingly as well. So it's a very different landscape. But, to have such a well-known Xbox property, that still we have not seen just yet for Microsoft's new multi-platform approach. So it really does not get much bigger than Halo. With that in mind, I guess we will keep following this story closely and this rumor, and we'll see what ends up happening. But, in this environment where seemingly nothing is going to change now for Bethesda and Activision Blizzard's future titles, and having some Xbox IP moved over on a case-by-case basis, I don't know, it does seem like it's a very real possibility. So we'll keep following this and see what develops. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. And I do realize I made a bit of an oopsie from last week's episode where I did not properly update the giveaway. So a lot of you were not able to enter until a few days later. I apologize. I do not intend on doing that often. I was very busy. I was not able to check in on it like I normally do, and that was just a huge blunder on my part. But having said that, if you did enter, then let me just tell you, you have very good odds. So I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X. And if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, then you can indeed follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel in a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I am trying to pay for your games. Trying to pay for a portion of them, I should say. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and we had a conversation on Tuesday about PS5's physical media, where the console is right now for actually buying and selling certain games and what the market prices are doing and things like that. So wanted to really finally sit down and spend some time talking about that. And then yesterday we actually had a separate conversation about PS4 and possible game sales on that console and the cross-gen period. So wanted to also discuss that outside of LTPS, so we just don't make this episode so absurdly long. Trying to do more of that nowadays, just so LTPS is not getting into like the hour-plus territory. Plus, it's just a pain to work on that much all in one upload. So we might do more of that occasionally, but that was yesterday. And then, coming up, we might have something on Sunday and then Tuesday. And as I mentioned at the start of this thing, I am at RGC Retro Game Con in Syracuse. So again, by all means, let's chit-chat, talk. and just enjoy video games. That's what we're all here to do, right? So that is pretty much it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.